You say you don't ever talk about Chad, yet you mention him every episode. Chad. Well, Chad mentioned.
I'm
boyfriend Chad now. Chad. There's Kevin. There's Chad. There's Kevin. There's Chad. Chad Zumock. Chad Zumock. Chad. I wish Chad the best. The Chad Show. Chad, definitely. Chad. Fucking Chad. Chad Zumock. They don't give a fuck about Chad Zumock. I didn't even realize you were saying that shit about Chad Zumock. Fuck Chad Zumock. I know that Chad likes to think I bring up his name. I don't. Chad Zumock, that you're a big Chad fan. Chad. What's up, Chad? What's going on, Chad? Chad Zumock. Chad Zumock. Fucking Chad Zumock. Chad. I don't bring up Chad's names to other comedians because I look like an idiot. I was making fun of Chad. I've seen Chad a zillion times do comedy. It's all on Chad. I don't give a fuck about Chad.
Right. You love him.
Chad. With Chad, I'm fine being cool. We could still be friends. Chad Zumock. Chad. And by the way, how insecure is Chad? Everything Chad says about me. Chad. I never crashed at Chad's place. Ever. Chad was never going to use Chad's name. I was never going to use Chad's name. Chadley. Chad Zumock. Chad. Chad's a good hype man. He's a good hype man. He was my hype man for a while. You pick Chad over me. That's fine. I don't care. I'm not mad at you. The only thing I am mad about him about now is the fact that he kept calling Chad Ray. It's like, come on, dude. Come on. What? You're calling Chad Ray like that? That's what hurt the most. Chad. Calling Chad Ray. It's like, come on, Chad's bullshitting. Chad's history with me and Chad. Chad has spent the night at my place like 30 different times. Chad fucking loved me, and I love Chad. Chad called me, or I called Chad. Bad Chad. Good Chad. Chad's bad Chad. Bad Chad. Hi, bad Chad. Chad Zumock. Chad Hard. Chad. I don't hate Chad. Chad Zumock. Chad's. Chad. Fuck you, Chad. You suck, dude. I mean, I'm sorry, Chad. I don't even know how to send Chad the link. I'll send it to him. What do I give a shit? Chad Zumock. Chad Zumock.
Chad. An imbecile. Like the dumbest motherfucker that ever lived.